So continuing with fingerprints, dermal ridges, the kind of undulating surface of the dermis binds nicely with the undulating surface of the epidermis. So the epidermal ridges fit nicely along the dermal papilla of the dermis. So the function of this is to provide a nice tight binding between the epidermis and the underlying dermis, and also increases surface area for diffusion of nutrients from the connective tissue in the dermis, because that is vascularized to the cells in the epidermis. So when this is torn apart or separated due to excessive or unusual friction, the separation fills with fluid, and that's what a blister is. Okay? So in places where we have evolved our skin to have good grip, the dermal papilla are enlarged, and that causes the dermal ridge to enlarge. So it's like a bigger hill, and the dermal ridge is a bigger hill, and that causes a ridge on the surface of the skin. And that's what you see here, these dermal ridges or fingerprints. And we have those on our fingers, our palms, our toes, and the soles of our feet. They are genetically determined, so no two people have the same type of, or the same fingerprint patterns or toe print patterns. Okay, let's move on to skin color. So skin color is influenced by things like blood supply. If you blush, that's because the blood supply, the blood vessels in your face open up more, and that causes blushing. Sorry, cyanosis is lack of blood flow to the skin, and that causes a pale look, like if someone's gonna faint or if they're in shock, for example. Pigments will also influence skin color. Keratin, which is a dietary molecule that we get from things like carrots and bell peppers and yams, will impart some coloration to the skin. It's an orange-yellow molecule and source of vitamin A. Melanin, produced by melanocytes, it's a pigment. And again, I think I mentioned before that the average human on the planet has the same number of melanocytes, but what imparts the different skin color is the amount of melanin produced by the melanocytes and the type of melanin. Some melanin is really dark, almost black. Some is kind of a yellow-brown, and some is somewhat brown in color. And the overall function of melanin is to provide a natural sunscreen, ultraviolet light protection. Albinism is a unique genetic condition where no melanin is produced by the melanocytes. So albinism occurs in humans and many other animals. So let's look at the dermis now. Underlying connective tissue region of the integument, and it's deep to the epidermis. It is vascular, highly vascularized, lots of blood vessels, and it is innervated, so it provides sensation, touch, pressure, pain, temperature, vibration. Two basic regions, the superficial papillary layer, which is in contact with the dermis, and that has those undulating dermal papillae, and then a deeper reticular layer. The papillary layer is composed of mostly areolar connective tissue, and then in the reticular layer we have that dense irregular connective tissue. In the papillary layer there's those dermal papilla, and within the dermal papilla there are tactile receptors called Meissner's corpuscles, and also tactile discs, which aren't really shown here. No, they're not shown in this figure. but the tactile discs are in contact with the stratum basale of the epidermis, and both of these function in touch and pressure sensation, light touch, light pressure. Oh, here we go. The tactile discs here. And the Meissner's corpuscles, or the tactile corpuscles in the dermal papilla, if you zoom in on a slide, you might see this kind of swirl-like pattern of cells, which is a tactile or Meissner's corpuscle found in the dermal papillae. Here's a zoomed-in view of one of these tactile or Meissner's corpuscles. Now deeper in the reticular layer, we now have that denser regular connective tissue. The hair follicles dive down all the way into the reticular layer, and that's where the sweat and sebaceous glands are also found. So here's a hair follicle diving down into the reticular layer. There's the epidermis. Papillary layer up here, deeper, most of it is the reticular layer, and then down here is the subcutaneous layer with adipose tissue. Here's a hair follicle diving down into the reticular layer. There's its sebaceous oil glands emptying into the follicle. That's a Arrector pili muscle. Here's a sweat gland with its duct leading to the surface of the skin. And down in the reticular layer, we have Pacinian corpuscles, which are also called lamellar or lamellated corpuscles. And notice that they are deeper, so they respond to deeper pressure or deeper touch. And they kind of look like onions in cross-section down here. Picture of the skin integumentary system. This looks like thick skin, epidermal, stratified squamous epithelium. There's some undulating dermal papillae, areolar connective tissue, deeper the reticular layer of the dermis, denser regular connective tissue, and then a few Pacinian or lamellar corpuscles down there. And then you see some adipose tissue here, so you can see where the subcutaneous or hypodermis begins. So the hypodermis, subcutaneous layer, areolar connective tissue, and adipose connective tissue connects the skin to the underlying tissues. For example, if you keep going deeper and deeper, you'll hit the muscles of the body. We also have Pacinian or lamellar corpuscles down in the hypodermis. And if you get a hypodermic injection, hypodermic meaning below the dermis, the needle goes all the way down here to deliver the medication. Okay, let's look at accessory structures. Hair or pili. They grow out of the hair follicles in the skin. We do not have hair on the soles or palms of our feet, sides of your fingers or toes, or on your lips, portions of the external genitalia, like the glans penis or the labia minora on the female. So the overall structure of a hair follicle, you have the hair and the papilla, which is the swollen portion down here. Excuse me, yeah, the hair bulb, which is a swollen portion. The papilla is the swollen portion that comes into the hair bulb. And you see the blood vessels. I'll show you a larger magnification here in a minute. Cursor, here we go. So blood vessels go into the papilla, or the hair papilla, and then the swollen part of the hair root is the hair bulb. The matrix of the hair is the central portion. So in cross-section, excuse me. The matrix is this brown portion here in the central area, and that's where the actively dividing cells are. Just like in the stratum basale, the cells that are produced there from mitosis get pushed out, and those cells first become part of the matrix, and then the medulla, the central regions of the hair, and the cortex. So the matrix again is the portion of the hair bulb that is mitotically active, producing hair cells, and they get pushed out. The central part is the medulla. Here in tan, surrounding it in red is the cortex. And outermost in tan here again is a thin cuticle. So those are the three regions of a hair, whether it's the hair root or the hair shaft. Okay? Papilla, bulb, matrix, medulla, cortex, and cuticle. And the root is within the skin, and the shaft is the exposed part. If you shave, you're cutting the shaft off, leaving the root down in the skin. Here's a zoomed in view of a hair, central medulla, surrounding cortex, outermost cuticle. The structure of the hair follicle, it's epidermal in origin. So during development, some of the cells of the epidermis dive down and vaginate down into the dermis, forming the hair follicle. And the hair follicle has an internal and external root sheath, and that is here color-coded in, I guess we'll call that orange, the internal root sheath, and in lavender is the external root sheath. So those two layers are part of the hair follicle, which is epidermal in origin again. And then external to that, in light blue, is a connective tissue sheath that envelops the hair follicle. And at the base is the hair root plexus, which innervates the hair follicle. So if you deflect the hair, if you touch the hair and push it, you can feel that because the hair follicle gets distorted, pushed a little bit, and the hair root plexus can sense that. So you can close your eyes and gently touch like the hair on your eyebrows or head or your forearm, and you can feel it without even touching the skin. That's because the movement of the hair and the hair follicle can be detected by the hair root plexus. Or if you yank out a hair, you can definitely feel that because of the innervation. Here's a slide cross-section showing you the hair bulb. The matrix would be here. Those cells get pushed out. Central medulla, surrounding cortex, and then layers of the hair follicle. Don't worry about the details here. Okay, moving on to the Arrector pili muscle, which is external to the hair follicle but is attached to it. So it's a smooth muscle, and when it contracts, it pulls the hair follicle straight up and down and makes it erect, hence the Arrector pili muscle. And it distorts this epidermis, it distorts the skin, and makes a goosebump or a goose pimple. Remember this guy? I see dead people. When your hair stands on end because of the dead people, your Arrector pili muscles contract, pulling the hair shaft erect, and your hair stands on end, and you get the goose pumps or the goose pimples. If you've ever seen a cat on a cold day and their hair's all fluffed out, or a cat in a cat fight and their hair is standing on end, that's because the Arrector pili muscles are contracting, pulling the hair follicles straight up and down, and distorting the hair for those cats. Color variation in the hair is similar to color variation in our skin. There are melanocytes, seen here in tan or brown, and they produce melanin. And just like with skin color, the type of melanin and the shade of melanin imparts hair color. Okay, we'll continue this and finish up on the next lecture.